So I think we will start. I think we are live now.
Okay.
So, hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Live in Conversation with Mast Qalandar Travels. I am your host, Dr. Vijayata Mahendru, and at the very beginning of this program, I would like to wish all the mothers who are watching a very, very happy International Mother's Day. Um, also, today we are carrying forward a conversation that we started last week, and it was full of technical glitches. Some of y'all who were there with us requested us to reschedule the talk when the connection is better. So, yeah, here we are. The connection is all right today, and we'll be continuing the same conversation that we started last week. However, I would still like to introduce our guest today, whose name is Indranil Datta. And Indranil is a nature enthusiast and a bibliophile who believes that true learning happens at the intersection of theory and experience. Indranil has traveled intimately and extensively around India's seen and unseen parts, known and not so well known forests and wild spaces, and has published widely as a regular contributor to Outlook Traveler and in national dailies like Indian Express as well. Now, without much delay, I would like to invite Indranil. Welcome, Indranil.
Thank you, Vijayata. Thank you so much for having me here. And apologies to your viewers for all the technical glitches we were facing last time. And I think this time it looks completely smooth. So I look forward to an uninterrupted conversation. And happy Mother's Day to everyone.
Yeah, and on behalf of my viewers, I am, and on behalf of my channel, thank you so much for your time once again. I understand that it's not easy to make time for something like this, which was already scheduled and couldn't happen. So, really, big thanks to you. So, shall we begin, Indranil? Why don't you just begin by introducing yourself and share how did you get interested in this field?
Right. So I remember being, completely unaware of what the concept of a national park was. The first time I happened to visit one, and this was when I was, if I remember correctly, 18 years old, and I was vacationing to Jaipur with my family, and Ranthambore happened to be on the itinerary, and the earliest memory I have of being inside a forest is just it's more auditory than visual because I don't think I was a very attentive child, and I just remember my whole sense of being filled by all the sounds in the forest, from birds chirping, and Ranthambore being a tiger reserve has a lot of tigers. The tiger density is really high, so there was a lot of tiger movement happening that day, and I heard plenty of alarm calls. So it was very dramatic kind of time to be in the forest. It was really alive. Lots of anticipation that we might see a tiger, and so on. And I remember it being a very visceral experience. So I didn't really intellectualize it. It just, to put it very reductively, just felt so nice to be in a forest that I've wanted to go back to a forest ever since.
Yeah. So, tell us more. How did your intensive experience begin through your education and everything?
Well, that's a good question because my conventional education, which is my years in school, were, I would say, complete, at least for me personally, a complete waste of time. I was a pretty horrible student in school. Not because I was, a truant child, but I just think I couldn't relate to anything that was being taught in school, and I was always severely struggling. And as opposed to that, my from my earliest visit to Ranthambore, I just felt a sense of wonder, which a good education system is supposed to impart, but I don't think ours does. That I felt automatically facilitated the inner learner, in me. And from there on, I realized that, we all have, I think, an inner urge to learn, to discover, kind of engage with the mysteries of the world, to put it romantically. And I felt that the only and only way I could do that is if I would step out of the city and find myself in, a forest or nature reserve. And only then would the learner in me, I think, really kind of grow. So from that point on, I did start pushing my parents to take me to a forest on every holiday as often as I could. And that's what happened to be the case. So Ranthambore was the first one. The second forest I visited was Corbett National Park. And from there on, every holiday or the other, I did kind of find myself in a forest. And as it really is in the oft repeated words of Jim Corbett, I mean, the forest felt like a book with no beginning and end, and no 2 days were ever the same. And I was filled with so much intrigue, wonder, and amazement that I felt like that the only time I was truly learning was when I was outdoors in the wild. And just the opposite of that was happening when I was in school. So I think the combination of both really drove my engagement with our wines.
वाओ इट्स सो इंटरेस्टिंग ऐसा लग रहा है जैसे थ्री इडियट्स के आर माधवन से बात कर रहे हैं द गाय हु इज मोर इंटरेस्टेड इन नेचर एंड हु एंड्स अप बिकमिंग लाइक अ नेचर फोटोग्राफर एंड राइटर सो या इंद्रनील हाउएवर जो आपके फैमिली के साथ ट्रिप्स होते थे उसमें तो आप डेफिनेटली किसी व्हीकल के अंदर बैठ के ही जंगल का एक्सपीरियंस करते थे राइट सो
Right.
व्हाट prompted you to step off that vehicle gypsy or that canter and start exploring the forests on foot?
um, well, I think I started off, not coming from a family or a culture where engaging with nature really ever was talked about, or it was seen as quote unquote waste of time. My earliest mode of being in a forest was like that of any other traditional tourist, and there's nothing wrong with that, which is someone who is very obsessed about seeing a tiger and who wants to get the best photographs so he can put it up on Facebook and have people like it. So that, to be very honest, remained the way I engaged with the forest for the longest time, until it got to a point where I just grew frustrated by a not seeing enough tigers, because if you're chasing a tiger, you'll never see enough of them. I mean, that's really how it is. You're always dissatisfied. So I remember, just coming back to one of the forest lodges I was staying at in Corbett and expressing my dissatisfaction, because I wouldn't, so much do it with my friends or family or outsiders, but I was quite pally with the locals, the staff who were working there, and we were on quite friendly terms. So I remember just ranting to them about um, um, how unhealthy the kind of tourism that's happening inside the parks is, and I'm tired of going around in a gypsy. I do want to see a tiger, but I do not want to see a tiger with 40 other people around me clamoring, around it. And so they heard me out very patiently, and were kind enough to just offer an alternative, which was they said, make sure you're ready tomorrow, skip tomorrow morning safari, have your walking shoes on, and we will take you for a walk, and you might even happen to see a tiger. And I was really amazed when I heard that where because back then, this was, I think, 2013 or 2014. The idea that you can go for a walk in a space that has tigers and not be breaking any rules or not be doing anything that's borderline risky was very new to me. So that's really the day, my way of seeing the forest or being in the forest changed from roaming around in a gypsy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. It's great that you got that chance. How is the experience? Then share with us, how is the experience of walking in the forest different from experiencing it from a vehicle, which most of us have done?
So I think the experience of walking in a forest varies according to the forest you are in. So, say for someone like me whose first experience of a proper forest walk was in a forest that had tigers residing in it, was an experience that was, of course, laced with fear. Because we were not armed, we were not carrying anything, to protect
Yeah.
us in case, of any kind of
Y'all
eventuality.
didn't have any guns or lathis or
So,
anything with y'all?
absolutely nothing, absolutely nothing on us.
No
Uh,
mashal to scare a tiger with fire or something?
No, 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 absolutely not. Because the strange thing is that I think the locals really like, and we often, have this kind of stereotype about those who live in the forest, that, oh, they live there, they see it every day, so they must not really have any love for it. But that's actually, I feel, partially, or rather, I'd say almost completely untrue, because though they don't go around expressing their love for the forest, verbally, or like writing about it like I do, or putting up long posts on Instagram. But their love is very, inward, and it's very felt. And they too, whenever given the opportunity to deepen their engagement with the forest and, see it in a new way, would jump at the opportunity to do so. So I think they were also very new in this adventure. And no, we really had nothing to protect us. I mean, I don't think cell phones count, and a camera definitely doesn't count. And I think that fear and that sort of vulnerability, I think, really opens you up to the forest like nothing else can. Because
Yeah.
consciously or subconsciously, you are registering every tiny detail out there. Your ears are ready to pick up the slightest twitch. You are constantly checking the tracks which are, on the floor. You're scanning the forest floor for signs of maybe a pug mark, or scat marking, or scratch marking. You are constantly scanning, the whole 360, the whole 180 degrees of your, range. And I think that kind of defensiveness really allows the forest to seep in, as mystical as that sounds. But that's really what happens. I mean, good nature writers have written about the the ego in a very traditional sense, as a protective layer, kind of being a barrier towards communing with nature and the forest. And I feel like walking in the forest, and in most Indian forests, you have big game like tigers and elephants and bisons and bears around. It automatic your ego, your self consciousness. Let me put it that way. I think automatically starts to wear off, and you are noticing things and picking up things which you otherwise would not in a gypsy, where you're completely safe. All you're
Yeah.
doing is waiting for the guide to point out tiger, or you're waiting for it to emerge from somewhere. But you're not noticing half of the things when you're in a gypsy. So that way, it's a very different experience.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's really fascinating because it kind of makes you a part of the forest. It brings out the animal instincts within you as well, because usually we human beings don't live in such precarious surroundings whereby we have to keep our ears and eyes at such high alert at all times. So that must be really an amazing you mean an experience that makes you humble even that after all you're that vulnerable here.
It is.
How Yeah.
I mean,
So
one might feel equally vulnerable while trying to cross the road in a busy city, but I mean, more often than not, I think one would admit that kind of experience just completely frustrates you, and wears you down.
hmm,
Whereas, I mean, and I don't know the inner mechanism in us that makes it happen or how it works, but it's completely different in the forest. When your defenses are down, you actually feel yourself more rejuvenated, more alive, more in
yeah.
tune with. body and your senses, and you feel, paradoxically refreshed through those exertions.
Hmm. So you just shared about how other nature writers also, who basically experience the nature and wild so intimately, how it affects their writing. So can you share with us how is writing about witnessing nature while walking different from witnessing nature through a vehicle or through a guided safari?
Yeah, I think the essential difference between those two modes of witnessing nature is that the experience of, I think, the experience of nature itself when you're walking is far more immediate, because you really are taking it in step by step. Whereas when you are in a gypsy, you're almost kind of trying to strategize all the time as to how you can see this or photograph that animal. And there's no right or wrong way of doing it, though personally I prefer doing the walks, but I also still do safaris once in a while. But I think if, you know, the experience of writing, which is to kind of let words or your emotions translate into words, almost like a spring that's automatically flowing, is very similar to walking, because you can't just walk into a forest and not this and not and disrespect the constraints of the places, so you are operating within certain constraints. If there's an animal there, you shouldn't approach too close. If that patch is too dense and potentially unsafe, you shouldn't be entering it without any protection. So you are trying to kind of, in a sense, work within the limits that nature has to afford in order to have an experience that's both fulfilling and safe. And
Yeah.
I find writing to actually be a similar experience where you are having to work within the constraints. You're having to think of who your audience is. When you're writing for, say, your travel magazine, it's going to be different from when you're writing for a conservation magazine. So
Yeah.
a lot of writing is working within the constraints, and also I think proceeding from sentence to sentence and word to word. At least that's how I approach it. Versus the almost I'd say kind of long view strategy that one takes when one is in a gypsy.
It's so interesting how you juxtapose walking in the forest with writing, and how both the experiences seem so similar to you. And in fact, as you were narrating it, I was also imagining it, and I do understand because I write. I mean,
Yeah,
even though I haven't really walked in one of these forests, but I do understand that how writing can seem like being out there in the wild and taking one step after the other. At
yeah.
this point, I would like to request our audience, if you all have any question from Indranil, please do write down in the comment box, and I will be taking those up during our conversation. Now, moving on, I'm really interested in knowing how can we access these forests on foot, because I have really never come across any such scheme. The closest I got to walking in a forest is walking in Delhi's city forests, and even though they have jackals and all, and which I have seen, and also Neel guys, lots of Neel guys and peacocks. But yeah, what about a common person going out there, in one of these places which has big game, and
Hmm.
how can we have walking tours there?
Well, I think first things first, never ever do it on your own. Any place that has big game, do not go out walking on
I
your own.
don't think one can even just do it, right? I don't know how one can do it.
Well, one can, maybe walk around in the fringes,
Yeah, in the
outside
fringes,
the area.
yes.
And, animals recognize no boundaries. So the fringe for them is as much a flourishing forest as the
Yeah.
demarcated areas of a national park. So, although I have had my own foolhardy moments, I mean, looking back at it, I wouldn't recommend going for a walk without a trained guide to anyone. And the good thing is, in today's day and age, opportunities like that have really opened up. So you might not be able to go for a walk inside Corbett National Park, but there are, homestays. There's one called Tanhao, which offers a guided walk through a hilly patch of forest. I think it's called the Man-Eater of Mohan Trek, and you can partake in that, and it takes you through proper tiger, elephant, bear territory. I mean, it's as flourishing a forest as the forests inside the park are. Or you can go to a place like Kanha, which now has a designated forest walk, which you can avail instead of a safari, where you are assigned a guide who knows the lay of the land, who knows the route, and takes you for, I think, fairly long, three to 4 hour walk, again through proper tiger territory. So these walks are not fobbing you off from a more genuine experience of the forest. In fact, I would say they probably are a more intimate way of engaging with nature and having a fuller and a richer experience of the forest. So that's the I think idea we often have about these walks which are conducted, that it'll be second best to a safari, but I would say it might. I mean, there's no comparison; they're very different things, but one might actually tend to enjoy it even more. And similarly, parks in the south like Parambikulam, Periyar, and many more. I know parks in the northwest. So I think a good guide, maybe if one can grab hold of like an Outlook Traveler guide or something of that sort, those really have mentioned of those have mentions of the activities that different parks, in the country allow, and you can check if it's only safaris or whether it's only walking or whether it's both, and you can pick and choose accordingly.
All right, thank you for that. And would you be kind enough to like write down the names of some of these in the comment box later? Just a couple that are coming to your mind. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
sure.
that people who are watching will have like a ready guide, then they can look deeper into it, how to
Yeah.
go about it.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for that. So now let us take like a short tour of your photographs that you've taken. So uh, I'll be sharing my screen for that.
sure, sure.
Just a second. Can you see my screen?
It's just showing up. Now I can. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So do share with us, where did you click this beautiful
Okay. I
picture?
I will. So this one's taken in Corbett National Park. It's in one of the most popular tourist zones called Bijrani. And what often happens in a park like Corbett, which is divided into zones, is that when a tigress has cubs, and say it's had a litter of four, and if the tigress is competent enough or fortunate enough to raise all of those four cubs into adulthood, for a fairly long amount of time. I think about one year, or about even sometimes
Yeah.
even 2 years. These cubs and the mother, they remain in the same area. So a tiger is often really hard to see because their territories are so broad and expansive. But when a mother has cubs, then sometimes these cubs just take, just hang around in that area for a good 2 years. And so where you would have only had one or two tigers within say a space of 20 odd square kilometers or so, you'll end up having six. So it makes it much easier to see. So this was one of
Yeah.
the cubs
Mhm.
which the tigers had. And interestingly, when you have so many tigers in the area, it's one would often think it's hard to identify them and tell which one's which. But there's actually a fairly easy way of doing that. And one is the kind of
The
uh,
stripes?
The stripes, yes, but an easier way is to look for a distinctive marking. So this tiger in this picture was called Pandit, and the reason it's called Pandit is because it has, if you look at its cheek, it has a P. It has a P-like mark, and that's
Yes.
why it's called Pandit. And it had a brother called Virat, which had a cheek mark that was more V. So a photographer could easily, look at one of these tigers and know whether it's a Pandit or a Virat.
That's such interesting piece of information. Thank you, Indranil. How about this beautiful picture here?
Well, this I happened to take last year in a place called Lanzira Tiger Reserve. It's about 3 hours from Nagpur. It's comparatively lesser known. It's smaller in size. Um, that year, the monsoons had showed up late, so when the park opened, it still remained extremely lush and green.
Yeah.
And it doesn't see a crazy level of it doesn't have too much tourist traffic, so you often kind of can get the park to yourself from time to time. And yeah, that's how I decided to take it, a nice empty road and a lush forest.
Yeah, and just the only human trace you can see is those tire marks out there.
Right, right, right,
It's
right.
lovely. Um, this,
Oh, this is actually a sad story because I took this in a place called Manas National Park, which is in Assam. And this is actually a really old structure. And I have spoken to someone, who has visited our parks in the 70s and 30s, before 70s and 80s, before wildlife tourism even became a thing. And his name is Prashanti Dasgupta, and he's written a brilliant book called Walks in the Wild, which I would highly recommend. But the story being that this place is called Mathanguri, and the this is a forest rest house in Mathanguri. So Mathanguri has two forest rest houses, one that's directly overlooking the river, and this is the second one. So anyone who did not get a room in the main forest rest house would have to walk down all the way to this forest rest house, which I think is about 50 meters apart, and stay there. And this was, I think, designed in a very, typically British way. You can see those wooden beams, you can see those arched roofs, and our silly government, instead of renovating it and maintaining it, they've come up with a whole new monstrosity of a structure, which you can see to the left, that white building, which sure
yeah.
might have rooms, which might be able to accommodate more people, but contains none of the elegance and charm of the old rest house. I mean, why not just renovate it and maybe also build another structure along with that if you have to cater to more tourists. So it's in a very dilapidated condition, but yet the reason why I took a picture is that even in such a ruined condition, its charm is striking, and I think you'd agree.
Yeah. It definitely retains its old world charm.
Yeah,
Yeah, actually, it's quite sad to learn that it's
exactly.
in shambles now and that it's been replaced by that other regular looking structure.
Yeah, and I think tourists should, bring up this point with the forest department as and when they can, because I don't think it's talked about enough. Because a lot of these forest trust houses are either so ill maintained that they're falling apart like this one, or they are renovated in a way to make it a concrete, structure with completely flattened roofs that retain none of the old, architecture. Why they do that is anyone's guess, but this they call it beautification, but all it does is make it hideous to look at. And I maybe it's a blessing in disguise that they didn't try and beautify this, because then we wouldn't even have this, and we'd have something,
Or they didn't try to raise it to the ground. In fact, I was thinking that the story is going to go there, that this no longer stands. Frankly, I actually thought it
Yeah,
would,
yeah,
you're
yeah.
going
I
to
mean,
go
who knows? Who
coming to
knows?
that.
It might just topple off at any point. But uh, usually, when they talk of renovation, they talk of beautification, and that means just doing away with the old architecture and adding concrete and all sorts of other very mundane looking and really boring kind of
Yeah.
elements of design to it. So I don't know why they just can't, retain its old charm and yet maintain it and renovate it. I mean, it beats me, and I think tourists should, yeah, just bring that point up more, so they recognize that we know what's happening.
Yeah, actually, it's a good moment to also tell our audience that few weeks from now we are having Raza Kazmi with us, who's a wildlife historian, and we'll discuss more about these forest guest houses with him as well, because he also has, I think, a lot to say about
He's the best person to go
this
talk to about.
topic. Yeah,
Yeah, he
yeah,
is the best
right.
person. Absolutely.
ठीक है, ठीक है. Wow, patchy.
So this is, I think, one of my favorite photographs from Corbett. It's taken in a place called Hekala. For those of you whom you don't know, it's another zone like Bijrani, the one I
Hmm.
mentioned earlier, and it's right inside the heart of the forest. You can
Yeah,
only and
I've been to
only.
Dikala.
Oh, great, great. So you can only stay there if you have an overnight booking. You can't stay there
Hmm.
otherwise. You can't do a safari unless it's in a canter, which is a bus-like vehicle.
Right.
Um so that's taken there, and we were coming back from a safari in which I had seen a tiger, so I wasn't looking, or we weren't looking for anything. Me and the other guests and the drivers, and the interesting thing is, if you look at this picture, you can see the elephant has really swollen nodes on its head, and that means it's in musk, which is when
Yes.
it's right when it's completely, when it's ready to mate, so it's overcharged on testosterone, you know
Wow,
uh
that's a dangerous time to be in front of an elephant.
yes, and we were in a gypsy, so I wasn't on foot, but even
Yeah.
before we saw it, the interesting thing is we could smell it. We knew it was there. We knew it was there. So,
Wow.
and yeah, then it just appeared, and I've always been enamored by elephants, and I just got lucky, with this picture. So thank you to the elephant.
Yeah, we saw two whole herds of elephants in Dikala. That was just something else, seeing this
Yeah,
entire herd,
yeah,
which you've only seen on TV right in front of your eyes. There's
yeah.
like this, you can actually see the matriarch leading and the little ones, walking between the legs of the adults. It was just
Yeah.
amazing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I just would like to kind of flag this, that there is a lot of, I'd say, bad behavior that tourists indulge in around, elephants. They go too close. Especially when they have calves, the matriarchs are, very defensive state.
Yeah.
And, I mean, one would assume they're doing this because they're trying to get better photographs, but I think, as the elephant showed me that day, that you don't have to get close to an elephant to really take a good photograph of it. I mean, even for the sake of photography, you can stay far away from it, and yet capture a good photo, because nobody gains from messing with an elephant in an Indian forest.
Exactly. For me, someone who comes from Jharkhand and who lives very close to an elephant sanctuary, we
Mhm.
have grown up on a very healthy diet of elephant man elephant conflict, human elephant conflict, and how many times these wild elephants have killed villagers who live inside the forest and all. So we are pretty cautious about it, but I do understand that there are people who are not aware. They think that this elephant is going to give them a ride, or something
Yeah,
like that, because they've
exactly.
not
Exactly.
never heard of elephants
Yeah, it
in
has
that
this.
way, maybe.
It has this, in the words of one of my favorite writers, Peter Matthias, and it has the saintly thread, and you would assume it's a quote unquote gentle giant, and it is, no doubt about it. And but
Yeah,
it can be a ferocious, kind of creature as much as it can be a gentle giant, and one has to respect, that element of it too. So yeah,
absolutely,
that's what.
absolutely. And this quaint
Okay,
picture.
so This quaint picture, as you say, is taken in a beautiful, beautiful reserve called the Jabbar Khep Nature Reserve. And since you asked me about walking and where we can walk, and I can type out the name for your viewers later on. So a little backstory about this place. Uh, Everything you're seeing here was a degraded patch of hilly forest for years until an amazingly enterprising woman by the name of Sejal Vora um, and I think a few local guides, one of whom is Viru Negi, who is the one who showed me around the place, um, purchased that patch of forest and nurtured it as a private reserve. So this is under no governmental control. Everything you see here, from that hut to those stones to the trees, it's been nurtured in a partnership with the locals, and again just breaks the stereotype of the locals as an insensitive kind of forest as insensitive to forests
Yeah.
uh, because
So,
the locals
like,
still, yeah,
in Jharkhand, generally, you see, of course, the people who live the forest dwelling people, the tribals out there, and they take a lot from the forest in terms of wood, in terms of animals, but but the state has illegalized so much of it that their whole lifestyle is in danger. And then on the other hand, we say, oh, these are endangered tribes and this and that. So what if you're going to keep them alive also, if you're not going to let their ways of living and way of life remain as it is, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And this is a huge problem with the Indian, bourgeois, the Indian middle class intelligentsia, that they are cocooned in their cities. They have no cognitive imagination outside it, and
Yeah.
I often hear the refrain that our country is improving and we're getting better and quote unquote progressing. And not even once do I hear a single mention of our tribals who are as much a part of the subcontinent and our culture and our social fabric as anyone. And it's I think harrowing almost, to think of
Hmm.
how they are not included in any kind of discourse about, the country, or are
Yeah.
so rare, especially, I mean, it does happen in academia, thankfully, but just within, I'd say, our familial and social circles, it's almost
Hmm.
like we are erased from our imagination.
Right. Right. Shall we move on, Indranil?
Yeah, yeah, sure. Sure, sure.
Where's this road leading to?
Where is it leading to? I'm not sure, but this is from a beautiful park called Landor. It's, I think, about a couple of hours away from Corbett, a park which Raza was kind enough to introduce me to. And you can talk
Acha.
to him more about it when you all meet. And um, um, I, I remember us seeing the park on a gypsy, and over there, in the company of a forest guard, you are allowed to see the park on foot. Uh, and yet again, I mean, you might see this picture and imagine that it's completely safe to stand there and take a photo. However, just to caution everyone else that even while I was taking a picture there, I was told to look out for an elephant and just take the picture really quickly and come back, because
Oh.
one would assume that an elephant, being such a large and such a large creature, is easy to spot, but one would be surprised at how easily they can just camouflage themselves within the fence.
Yeah. How about this rocky thing here?
Well, again, taken on a walk in Kanha National Park. This isn't the walk I was referring to. However, they do. This is a walk that leads by the side of the Banjar River, and yeah, the sun was setting, and we were supposed to go for a safari that day, but we didn't. And I think the really pretty and charming thing about Kanha is that I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, a predominantly sal forest, and yeah, it just seemed like such an aesthetic theme.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know what those rocks are actually, but
Mm.
but
Yeah, it's
yeah,
a nice picture.
yeah.
And this as well.
This is Corbett. This is
So
Dakala.
clearly demarcated these three zones here in this picture. Where's this taken?
I think it's taken from what is known as Crocodile Point in Dhikala. So it's a point,
Okay.
if I'm not mistaken, from where you can see crocodiles and gharials. And
Yeah.
this was the month of January, so the winter light was fairly soft. The water was clear and blue, and that's how it.
Oh, this is really upsetting.
This is very upsetting and an issue that has to be addressed and talked about more often.
Yes, so
And
please do. Where did you click this?
I clicked this right outside Corbett. I mean,
Right
right outside Corbett. I can
outside?
almost say it's inside Corbett because it's right on the border. I mean, you probably walk in and you are in the park
Yeah.
because that's how close one of the villages is to the park. And I mean, Sanctuary Asia and people like Kara Tejpal have done a really good job of raising the issue of how important good waste disposal is to the well-being of our national parks. And I have often pondered on why we as Indians have such a bad ethic of waste disposal. And this also includes myself. I can't take myself away from it because the temptation to just throw a wrapper outside the window and not care about it is very strong. And I think it's as much an ecological question as a philosophical and a psychical question as to why we have this kind of attitude towards the waste we generate. What is it we're really trying to feel when we throw that wrapper out of the car?
Yeah, very big question. Very big question and extremely sad photograph.
Yeah. This is also Kanha. This is the walk I was talking about, where I was taken for a walk into tiger territory. It's a walk that's officially offered, and
Okay.
this is the Banjar River. It's really beautiful.
All right. Very nice. Wow. You
You want to
happen
walk?
to click an owl in the daytime.
Yeah, it's not too hard. Corbett's a great place for birding. This is one of the lodges in Corbett. It's called the Bandhat River Lodge, which only and only offers walking safaris. I mean, I think they can also arrange for a safari if you want one, but their USP is that they take you for a walking safari into proper, forests with
Okay.
expert, trained guides. And I was on one of these when, this just whisked past me and I took a picture of it through the foliage and then figured out later it's a collared scops owl because you can see it's kind of like wearing a collar. That's why it's
Yeah.
called a collared scops owl.
All right.
Yeah,
Looks really nice.
yeah.
Ooh. What about this?
Outside the park, and in most parks, especially Corbett, you realize that a lot of wildlife thrives outside it as much as inside it. And in this particular spot in this a village called Marchula, you have for many years, there's a crocodile which resides there and is often seen basking on, on sandbar or like a rocky kind of
Yeah.
island jutting out of the river. And my friend and I were lucky that just when it yawned, we were there to take a picture. But
Oh,
it's
that's lovely.
outside the park, yeah. So any tourists visiting our national parks and they might not have like the core zone experience. Can take heart in the fact that if you keep your eyes and ears open, you might be able to see as much wildlife outside the park as
Yeah,
inside.
at least some deers and all, though one can see in the
Yeah,
fringes very easily.
yeah, yeah, sure.
And the last picture in this slideshow.
Taken in Panda National Park, which I visited last February. Um, I don't know about this particular area, but I remember one of the grasslands I encountered right after this one was a
Okay.
place from where I think a village was relocated. And if you go to Corbett or any national park, uh, one should try and ask the guides, because we assume we have this romantic imagination of nature as a place that's completely
Devoid
uninterfered.
of humans. Yeah, it has always been like this.
Yeah, but a lot of it is just, cultivated through policies. It's almost like curated for the eyes of the tourists. And it's important to engage with the history of, what the place is. Were there people living there at some point? If they were evicted, why were they evicted? Could an alternative have been found?
Yeah.
Have they been compensated fairly? So I think these are things which I hope my photos can pose as much as show the aesthetic beauty
Yeah.
of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And just thinking about this picture and imagining like a tiger here can be like, 1 meter, less than 1 meter away from you, and you won't even know. This one
Completely.
is perfect camouflage for a tiger, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Completely hidden. I mean, once in Kanha, I had a leopard, I think 2 meters away from me in front of the gypsy. And I couldn't put my eyes on it. I couldn't see it. So, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
that's
amazing.
why, yeah, I mean, no one should go for a walk alone in any of these places because
Right, right. Thank you
our
so
eyes.
much for taking us on this virtual tour with you, Indranil. So, having seen so many nice photographs and having discussed a number of issues, I would like to ask you before we move on that what role do you think photographs play in your writing as well as as a tool for conservation?
Um, I have often, felt that my writing is very visual, and my writing is very descriptive, and I leave a lot to the imagination. And when that is supplemented with a photograph, I don't kind of see it as a photograph canceling out what the person who's reading, the reader, might have imagined, but I often see it playing some sort of a supplementary role. And I think that's the role it does play in my writing. I think to just heighten that imaginative capacity, that too, because I know a lot of people have not had the good fortune of visiting, national park or maybe that particular park I'm writing about. So it's
Yeah.
just an imaginative aid to the reader.
Right, right. So, Indranil, like you have spent such a significant time in nature. So, how,
I don't think I answered the other question though.
yeah, about
Yeah,
the tool for
I
conservation?
think I'll just quickly answer that because I think
No,
it's
I'm
really.
sorry. When you stopped, I thought
Oh, no, no,
you
no, that's okay.
want to answer.
No worries,
Okay,
no worries.
okay.
So I'll just quickly answer that because I think it's an important question,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
when
yeah. It's
and
quite
it's
important.
enough because we see social media flooded with pictures of pretty animals and of tigers and everything else from our wilds, but how many of them or is any of them having any impact on the dialogue of conservation? I do not expect a photograph to necessarily go on and change, plans and policies, but is it making us think differently about the plight of our national parks, which are always, under threat in times like ours? I would say we can do better. We're not necessarily, doing enough. And one doesn't have to think about conservation only as a nat geo photographer. One can be a tourist and also bring in the element of conservation.
Yeah, I think if only that consciousness is there, any
Yeah,
tourist, any common person in their limited circle can also spread that information. Like if I were to click that picture of, wild animals eating out of plastic garbage,
right.
definitely, I would be moved to write a line or two about it, how I feel about it. That picture in itself actually is enough. The visual element is enough to stir anybody. Yeah. So I think, yeah, we as conscious citizens should be more conscious about
I,
our the way we
I,
engage on social media also with our photographs and everything, not just make it like, oh wow, had a great time in this forest and period, you know.
I mean, it's not our fault because the tech gurus driving social media just make it so horribly superficial and addictive. But I guess we can retain that level of awareness that hey,
Yeah,
maybe
that is not asking much, asking
yeah,
for much.
yeah,
Hmm. So, Indranil, how has writing about nature influenced your relationship with nature? Now I'm coming to this, which is like kind of following from the previous discussion we had, you know, that
uh-huh,
once I start writing about it,
right.
how does the relationship that you feel towards it change? And in your
Uh,
case, what is it?
right. So I think you realize that um, your memory is not as fixed as you think it is. I mean, I'm not saying this in terms of like, having a checklist of things you saw and then forgetting it. I'm saying this more in the sense of how you really experienced that moment. Because, I've often come back from, say, a trek in the hills to kind of read my notes or my diary from that day and have realized how aggrieved I felt by the weather or just by my situation at that point, and how discomforting at that point everything felt. And yet, when I've come back home and I kind of look back at the moment, none of that discomfort remains, and all you remember is really the sublime aspects of being in the wild, and you kind of get in touch with what is like almost a transmutation of your memory. And you realize that if you were to write about this some experience today, and if you were to write about some experience tomorrow, you would write about that experience in two different ways, on two different days. And I think that's the kind of magic which only writing was able to kind of show me, and that's how it changed my relationship.
So nicely you've put it, Indranil. Thank you so much. But still, I think there must be some difficult days, you know, as a writer also. So, what are the hardest things that you've struggled with as a nature writer?
Oh yeah, there are always difficulties. I mean, every day is really difficult as a writer, as any writer would testify. Um, and I think the most difficult task, especially given today's political climate, is to try and not necessarily romanticize nature to a point where it's cloyish, where it's overly, sweetened with sentimentality. And that's a very, very fine line, to tread. I mean, how do you express your aesthetic delight without wallowing in sentimentality or without crossing that fine line of refined appreciation, into close sentimentality? And I think that really remains a challenge. And of course, the I think trickiest of all challenges is how do you tell a good story to someone who might have no interest or might have no acquaintance with the natural world, hold their attention, and yet contextualize it in a way where it's not just um, you know a travelogue that doesn't leave the reader with any other questions,
Hmm.
how to kind of add elements of the politics involved in nature, because nature is a very political space, and I think it behoves all of us as writers to bring up that element in our writing, and which I per se haven't necessarily been very successful at, but I think that still tries to remain my aim, and thus I think I challenge with it. So, yeah.
So, what tips would you give to others or upcoming writers, younger writers who wish to become nature writers and travel writers? and also some tips to get published, because I think I had thought you would say struggling with publishing as well, but I realized you have published a lot. So it's a good thing to ask you, because new writers, I think one of the biggest challenges that they face is how to get published, and other things as well. So please give us some tips in that area.
Well, the truth is, I do struggle to get published still.
Yeah,
And
even now.
even now, I mean, the same publication, and justifiably so. I mean, I do realize that sometimes when the same publication I've written, piece for rejects my piece, it's because my standards, have dropped. It hasn't quite hit the mark. So that really is a never-ending journey, and there is no one-time, answer to the
Solution.
conflict in question. But I think two things are important to look out for. One is the competitions a lot of these travel magazines open up, where they are ready to publish your stuff if you happen to be a winner of the competition. So that way you can build your, networks. And
Right.
B, start from a small place. You might not necessarily require to aim for the number one, travel or the conservation magazine. You can start
Hmm.
from publication of a lower quality. So when you're approaching the magazine of a higher quality, you have some published work to show for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So that's very important tip, and I'm actually quite amazed to hear that even you face troubles when it comes to publishing, because
I mean,
yeah,
well, it's clear to anyone if one has noticed I haven't been published as frequently in the last couple of years. I mean, that's also because I'm really tied up and busy with other things. But even other than that, I haven't been published as frequently as I once was. And also, just to kind of answer your question about what a nature writer kind of should do, and which I think I did do, and I wish someone might have told that to a younger me, is to kind of look for nature where you are, and embrace
yeah,
our thinkers who helped us realize that. And I'm not saying this as a Bengali, but someone like Rabindranath Tagore, one of our earliest ecological thinkers. I mean, we are not taught about him properly in school or college or otherwise, and or any of the English romantic poets, who saw nature right in their very being and did not necessarily have to travel, 200 kilometers away from a city to have the experience of nature. So you can start right where you are. Look for a small patch of forest like you did when you were living in Delhi and you
yeah.
visited. Yeah. So
I
start
used
where
to
you.
go for a walk every day in that forest because it was right behind my house, actually. So I was living in, luckily, I was in that good location. And I discovered that forest during COVID time. So it was a very,
Oh,
very helpful,
important. I'm
yeah,
sure.
helpful
I'm
thing
sure.
for me.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Hmm. So, last question for this
Okay.
conversation, Indranil. What do you think needs to change about the climate change and wildlife conservation discourse in order for it to be more effective? We've briefly touched upon this topic, but I
Yeah.
would like you to talk about it in a little more detail.
Sure. I'll do
Also, I'm
so.
asking you this because, a 3 weeks from now we have the International World Environment Day coming up, and anyway, I'm always very conscious, and if the topic and if the speaker's expertise permits, I always try to bring about questions of climate change and all in my talks here,
Yeah.
and we need to look at it from all angles possible. So, from your understanding and experience, do let
Yeah.
us know.
Yeah, sure. So from my personal, experience, the intellectual inquiries I have kind of undertaken, has led me to, quite rightly, to realize what you said, that okay, we need cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary communication, and we also, I think, have to start resisting and outrightly refuting some of the myths that are sold to us from very early on about the idea of progress and technology and living in a world that's like a technological utopia, completely devoid and alienated from nature. Even sustainable development itself, it's such an oxymoron, because when we hear the word development, it strikes us as something to do with industrialization and modernization, and not so much with really developing the human being.
Yeah.
uh, and when I bring up the human being, I think the idea of human nature itself, I think, is very important. And here, philosophy and psychoanalysis play a really key role in adding to the dialogue and conversation, because so much of the dialogue and discourse we hear just, I think, bandies on about, okay, how bad we are as a race and how bad we are as a species, and how bad we are as people. This earth was given to us in a perfectly pristine state, and all we've done is abused it and ruined it. But that is absolutely, absolutely untrue. I mean, it goes against it's a very, very scientifically incorrect definition of human nature. And if psychoanalysis has shown one thing, and Freud talked about this years ago, it is that human nature is fundamentally ambivalent. So when you are hating on something, when you are mistreating something, even if it's nature, let's not forget the proximity of hate to love, because human nature is fundamentally ambivalent. And the fact that we are mistreating nature, and are exploiting it, and just not caring about our waste disposal systems and all of that, might indicate to something far deeper. Not at all that we are corrupt and perverse creatures who are ruining things, but probably because our conditioning has distorted our relationship to nature so much so that we aren't able to kind of engage with it open heartedly. And it's how it's hard to kind of mourn the loss of nature in our lives, in our cities, around the world, and to realize that, okay, the problem is so structural that I, as an individual, might be able to make such less difference to it. So I think the guilt of the individual, and no matter who is doing this, an activist or conservationist, is completely off the mark when the individual is blamed for his or her actions. Moral shaming, guilt, the individual is absolutely in the least not responsible. There is nothing about human nature that is fundamentally wrong or evil. Uh, a manifestation of cruelty and abuse and hate implies as much a failed effort to love as and have a healthy and a constructive relationship, as much as it does, as much as it showcases sides of us which are true, and they exist side by side, each other. So I think these inner reflections have to be inculcated into the discourse about climate change, because I feel a lot of why we do not look after nature is because we simply cannot accept how good it feels. Because when we accept how good it feels, we'll have to accept how torn away we are from it. It's like, being torn away from a lover. You will shoot out in anger and get enraged at everything that's around you. How do you mourn that loss? How do you grieve that loss? How do you then constructively reconnect? That is, as much a part of the climate battle for us at an individual level as it is, at a collective level. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you so much, Indranil, for really, speaking your heart out in this fashion. True writer's fashion. It went really deep, and
I
I
hope
think our audience and myself also will have to hear it a couple of more times to actually grasp the full meaning of what you have just shared with us. And really big thanks to you for your efforts, for your writing, um, for your time today. And one comment we have here is from Siddharth Pandey. What a fab event this was. Some of the best images I have seen. A privilege to have shared some of my most memorable forest experiences with Indranil. Forests and friendships go together.
Oh,
Thank
thank
you,
you so much.
Siddharth, for this lovely comment. And thank you, Indranil, once again for joining Mast Qalandar Travels on Live in Conversation.
And thank you so much for having me. It was a lovely conversation, and
Yes.
yeah, I hope good luck for the conversation with Raza and the rest of the interviews you have coming. So thank you
Thank you.
again.
Thank you so much. Bye. Bye, everyone. Thanks to the audience for watching this again after last week's fiasco. So, all right. So, we'll end it here. Bye bye, everyone.